Romans chapter 12, 1 and 2 tells us how we should be conducting our lives. And it's really a summation of the entire book, what he's driving at in the entire book of why it is that we need to be self-sacrificing. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. About 10 years ago, there was a young man who was out at a lake, and a couple of other kids were picking on him. And after they were picking on him, the two kids went for a swim. I may be wrong about the number. I know it was more than one. Went for a swim and drowned. And the boy could hear them and see them drowning. And he turned his back. It brought up a lot of questions, right? Legally, he did nothing wrong. He wasn't required to sacrifice his life for someone else. But morally and ethically, he should have tried, right? We can see that. I'm reminded of a story, an account of the Titanic when it went down. You know, most of those boats, the little tiny boats, they didn't have near enough. Most of them had half capacity of people in them. And they could hear the people screaming for help. And only a few of the boats went in, because everyone else said, if we go in, they'll capsize us. They'll overwhelm us. We won't be able to take them all in, and they'll turn us over, and we'll die too. But there are a few there who said, forget it. I don't worry about the risk. I'm going to go in. Now, which ones are the ones that we look at and say, these were the noble ones? These are the ones who did what was humane, who did what was loving. And yeah, we can make an argument of self-preservation. Sure, I get that. But is that called a sacrifice of self if we only protect ourselves? Are we a living sacrifice if the things that we do we never run into any kind of obstacle or trouble or inconvenience for the sake of other people or even persecution? Can we say that we're living a living sacrifice if we never sacrifice anything? It's hard for us to say that that's a living sacrifice, right? Well, that's the idea behind the lesson tonight, about the sacrifice of self in bringing the gospel to other people. And we all have a part to play in this. We all have a part in here. And I'm hoping to be an encouragement tonight, so that to get you thinking about ways that you can participate and ways that you can do things and even more. I appreciate the people that are already doing things. I know there are people doing things that I have no idea about. I recognize that. I recognize that a lot of the things that I'm doing and other people aren't doing is only because they are maybe doing other things. So this is not a blanket condemnation of anyone. But it is an encouragement, maybe even a spark, maybe even something for you to think, I can be one of those people in those boats that goes back in and finds and rescues other people. You know, I'm not aware of any of those boats that decided to go back in. I'm not aware of any of them being capsized. In fact, what I have heard was that there were several of them that couldn't fill their boat up. They couldn't get enough people in because they were dying so quickly. And we fuss and fret over what might happen if we decide to extend the invitation to someone. Let's not be that way. Look in Romans chapter 12 and verse 3. He says, I say, through the grace given to me, to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, as God has dealt to each one a measure of faith. Perhaps it's a little bit ironic that what Paul is talking about here is people who had a lot of ego, who had a lot of, a lot of self-worth in their minds, right? I'm so important. In fact, that's a major cause of division in the first century, was because people thought they were so important. Read, for example, the book of 1 Corinthians. They were actually debating about which of the miraculous gifts was the most important, because they wanted to say that since I have tongues, I'm more important than you are. And Paul's writing to them. He's writing to them in Rome. He's writing probably because, even though he hasn't been there, he probably knows this is how things happen. He wrote definitely to the Corinthians and told them, hey, you need to act in love toward one another. You don't have the best of gifts. You have a gift, just like everyone else does, or a lot of other people have. But he had to kind of pull them down. It's ironic, though, that sometimes we read that and we have to be taught the opposite of that. Stop writing yourself off. It's not sober-minded to think so less of yourself, so little of yourself, to think that you can't do anything. That's not sober-minded. That's not humble. That's false. We have the opposite problem in our culture. As Christians, we want to make sure that no one thinks that we have any kind of confidence whatsoever. Why? You know, in our culture today, confidence is one of the main sins you can have. Just, if you don't believe it, go on Facebook and say something confidently as a matter of fact, something that is just a matter of opinion, but you say it with confidence and see how many responses you get. You get a lot of responses. It may have slowed down a little bit lately. People are not as active on Facebook maybe. But the point is that when you stand up for something and you say, this is the way it is, this is what truth is, people will come out of the woodwork trying to convince you, no, you don't know what you're talking about. You're arrogant. You're prideful. But knowing truth is not the same thing as having pride. And our culture teaches that's what it is. And so what do we do as Christians? We write ourselves off. We diminish ourselves. We don't allow ourselves to do the things that we know we ought to be doing. We allow the society around us to cut our voices off a little bit. And I'm not talking about, going out and blasting people. I'm just talking about talking to people, introducing truth. We get afraid of that. And for whatever reason, we're afraid that people are going to say something about it because we're so timid nowadays. Do you remember what Paul told to Timothy? God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power. And this is what we follow. So look in Matthew chapter 13, verse 33. Jesus actually has a parable in this section of parables about the kingdom that is really interesting and helps us to, just one verse, helps us to see a little more perspective of what we're trying to accomplish and what we have to do. It's granted, I didn't grow up in the 50s. I'm not old enough to be alive when that happened. But I know what everyone says. The church grew enormously in the 50s. The fastest growing church in the 50s. I don't know how long we stayed there. And in some ways that's a great thing. In some ways it's really not that big a deal. We ought to be growing every year as much as anyone else is. But the thing is we live in a different culture now than we used to. There's no question about that. People see things differently. People have a lot less knowledge than they used to. All kinds of things have changed. And so we have to change our tactics a little bit. Matthew chapter 13 and verse 33, it says, another parable he spoke to them. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till it was all leavened. That's the whole parable. And what he's saying here is 3 things at least about the kingdom, the nature of evangelism. The first one you see here is it takes effort. This woman needed this dough, and she put inside this the meal 3 measures of meal. She put in leaven, right? Now, I don't know how difficult. I have never made bread. I've never kneaded dough. I've never done any of those kinds of things. I don't know how much effort it takes. But I know it's probably not the same as lifting a truck. But it's still a matter of effort, right? We have to do something, and this is what it takes for us to do something. For us to evangelize, we've actually put the effort into it. It doesn't have to be monumental things. This is a woman who is simply baking bread, and so she puts leaven in there. Are there things that we can do? They're small. It's amazing sometimes how we kind of crawl over each other to do the great big things. It's the little things that matter. The older I get, the more I recognize that fact. It's not the big things, it's the little things that add up over time. It took effort. Another one that you notice here is that it's often unseen. You don't know the impact you're having on other people. You can't know it. But I can know something for sure. If you're not setting out to have an impact on other people, you're not likely to have much of an impact at all. But if you are willing to sacrifice, if you are willing to try to put in a little bit of effort, to try to put in a little bit of leaven, which is representative of influence, what you will find is that you won't see it happening in their hearts, but God can be working on them. It's ironic, I guess, that Jesus talks about leaven in this way, because in almost every instance of the Bible, when leaven is mentioned, it's a bad thing. But here it's a good thing. And here it represents the influence that you can have, though it's unseen. But we too easily get discouraged, don't we? We too easily set aside our efforts and we say, that little thing isn't going to do anything. It's not going to help at all. So I do a good deed for someone every now and then. It's not going to help in any way. But that's false. You don't know what it's going to do. None of us are prophets here. I do know that some very small things can add up over time. I can tell you all kinds of stories. I've heard a story of a lady that went to a vacation Bible school when she was 5, and she got a little Bible that a teacher wrote a note in it. And 30 years later, she was in another state where there wasn't any churches, and she started thinking, I need to go to church somewhere. And she said in her head, the only thing I can think of is that I still remember that lady that gave me that Bible. And she went and found the woman's name and called her, somehow got her phone number and called her and talked to her about the Bible, and she was baptized 30-something years later because of a little note she put in a Bible. It's worthless. Little bitty thing. It's not worthless. It's often unseen. And the third thing here we can see here is that it takes time. And this is a nemesis of ours, right? We live in a microwave society. Man, if we try something and it doesn't work right now, it's over. It's done. We're going to figure out something else to do. And we're already figuring out what to do next when we're doing the things that we're doing. Because we think most of the time it's not going to work anyway, so we just kind of run from one place to another, to another, to another. And, there's one thing I've learned over time as well. You know this as well as I do. Consistency, doing something over and over and over again is what brings the results, not just doing it a few times and calling it quits. That's what Jesus is teaching us here in the parable of the leaven. Now let's think about for a minute. Now, this is going to sound absolutely outrageous to you, but I actually cut the number down a lot. What would it take for us to have 500 people in this congregation? Some of you are giggling. I don't blame you. What would it take to seriously think about? I'm not talking about the logistics of having a room for them. We can worry about that later. If we had 500 people coming to church here, we would figure out a place to put them. Don't worry about that. What would it take? We think, what would it take for me? I get this way. I'm thinking, what would it take for us to have a baptism? Wouldn't that be nice? That was great to see the one we had today. And I started thinking about it. I think we've had 5 baptisms since I've been here. That's not nearly enough. Not nearly enough. And we all know that. And so I've been praying a lot. Lord, I want to see some results. Isn't it frustrating? Sometimes you do things and you don't see the results. And what happens? We are being tested. Do you really want this? Do you really want to see some results? Stay with it. And we're being tested and tested and tested. And sometimes God withholds results. I don't know if He withholds the results, so to speak, but it happens that way. And we don't see results, and we don't see results, and we don't see results. And then we start seeing a trickle, and then it goes away again, and all kinds of things, up and down and up and down. And that's the way life works. But if you're working, it doesn't matter. Remember 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 58. Be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing your labor is not in vain in the Lord. So if you have faith enough to believe that verse, faith enough to believe that there is no such thing as vain labor if it's the Lord's labor, you're going to continue on doing it. And if you believe that what you're doing is going to yield results because it's what God tells us to do, then you keep doing that thing. You don't just jump from one thing to another. Knowing that is the easy part. The difficult part is living that, isn't it? So let's think about this. What would it take, just hypothetically, what would it take for us to have that many people? Well, first of all, we're going to have to recognize that it's not going to be an accident. Could you imagine? I remember saying this from the very beginning that I got here. And I'm not saying that I'm the only one that's talked about evangelism, and I'm not suggesting that the previous men didn't do anything evangelistically. All I can talk about is what I've seen. And I've said several times here, we're not going to grow just because the community's growing. And you know what? I'm not a prophet, but it came true, hasn't it? In fact, Carl and I have looked at each other so many times and said, there's thousands of people moving in. Why aren't any Christians moving in? And where are they? I don't have any idea. You know what? It doesn't matter. It's not going to happen by accident. And it's not going to be overnight. Man, could you imagine if we had 500 people show up next week? I mean, I would have a heart attack, first of all, because I would have to think differently. And then we'd have to figure out where to put them, and we'd be kicking out walls, and we'd be doing it outside and all kinds of stuff. But we know that's not going to happen. What if it happened in 20 years? Would that be okay? Oh, we don't want it 20 years. We want it in 3 months. Hey, let's do it. Let's shoot for 20 years first, and let's see what we can do in 20 years, because there may be 500 people that we could find in 20 years. Does that make it a little bit easier for us to process? Absolutely it does. I am not God. I'm not a prophet, as I've said. If we're shooting for 500 people in 20 years or 30 years, and we make it in 5 years instead, who's going to complain? Right? But let's give it time and recognize it's not going to happen overnight, and don't get discouraged. I have to tell myself this a lot. Those numbers on that board mean nothing. We can be growing and still shrinking in numbers. It's possible. But man, doesn't it feel good when the numbers are up? Doesn't it feel good when we see 70, 80 people here in a congregation? We hit that 99 mark 3 or 4 times, and I'm so mad because one time Michael stayed home, and it went from 99. It would have gone from 99 to 100, but he stayed home because he was sick, and I'm still mad about that. Not really. And I don't even know if it was Michael, but somebody did that, okay? Now, does it matter? No, it doesn't matter. What matters is we're actively trying to reach out with people to help them see the truth, the gospel. And if we never reach 500 people in the congregation, who cares? We may touch thousands of lives by trying to reach a number. And that's what matters. We're trying to reach people with the gospel. And if we baptize them and they go to another faithful congregation of the Lord's church, so be it. Let them serve there. And we can be a nurturing machine. We can be the ones that are supplying all the babies to go to all the different congregations. Let's be that way. But I'd love to see us reaching out into the communities, doing everything that we can. So it's not going to be an accident, and it's not going to be overnight. But here's some things. We need to make sure that we're mission-focused. Matthew chapter 28, 18 through 20, we all know this. And I don't want to limit it to evangelism. And you know how I've said many times about what we should be doing, what evangelism actually is. But look at what he says here and remind ourselves. He says in verse 19, "Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I've commanded you, and lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age." Now, we know that making disciples is not just baptizing people. We've had that discussion a lot. It's baptizing them and then training them in everything, right? That's what we're doing here. But while we're training each other, while we're learning and growing in Christ, we're not skipping over the first part of trying to convert people. It all works together. And here's the problem that we run into. Sometimes we get so caught up in our own personal development and growth that we forget that part of our development and growth is reaching out to other people. And this is a fact. If you are not reaching out and trying to include other people in some way, in service to other people, you are not growing in Christ. There's going to come a limit to that, where at some point, in order for you to continue to grow, you're going to have to expand beyond yourself. How do we reach 500? We keep our mission in mind. We also recognize that we're fit-focused. The idea is, where do you fit? Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4, starting in verse 11. Excuse me. It says, He himself gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists and pastors and teachers, for the equipping of the saints, for the work of ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ, until we all come to the unity of faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to a perfect man, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, that we should no longer be children tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the trickery of men and the cunning craftiness of deceitful plotting, but speaking the truth in love may grow up in all things into Him who is the head, Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and knit together by what every joint supplies, according to the effective working by which every part does its share, causes growth of the body for the edifying of itself in love. You see, every part of this congregation has a part in the body, has something to do. And it may be a small part, but if it's who we are, it's where we are, and it's what God has put us into, we do our part humbly and willingly, no matter what it looks like. Whether people receive glory or not, we still do it because we're serving God. So we have to recognize where we fit, right? And I think we do a good job of that. A lot of y'all are doing a lot of things that are very, very active in that. We need to continue with that and recognize that. We also need to recognize that we are ability-focused. Now, Romans chapter 12 also talks about this in the context of the church and the growth of the church and the work of the church. And I think it's related to our talents, our abilities. In verses 3 through 8 of Romans chapter 12, we'll start as verse 4 here. It says, For as we have many members in one body, but all the members do not have the same function. So we, being many, are one body in Christ, and individually members of one another, having then gifts differing according to the grace that is given to us, let us use them. If prophecy, let us prophesy in proportion to our faith. If ministry, let us use it in our ministering. He who teaches in teaching. He who exhorts in exhortation. He who gives with liberality. He who leads with diligence. He who shows mercy with cheerfulness. I would dare say that all of us in here could probably find ourselves in 3 or 4 or 5 of these, maybe all of them. These are just part of being human. But where are your strengths? You know, the great thing about being in the kingdom is that we can, as a team, we use our strengths to the betterment of the whole. So you don't work on your weakness. You let someone else who has that strength, you let them do that. And you work on your strength. What are you strong at? Are you strong at encouragement? Are you able to go through here? Are you the one that can be very generous for other people and giving? Or do you have other gifts? I would encourage you to think about 2 or 3 of these and say, which ones are the best that I can do? And maybe even find the best one and concentrate on that for a month. What can I do using this? And you know what? There may not be a place right now that's open for you to do those kinds of things. But there is a place for you to do them. And just because we haven't organized, or we haven't had the elders say we're going to do this, or we haven't had anybody come up with the idea yet, doesn't mean that you can't do it. If it's a strength of yours, get busy. You know, the great thing about working with your strengths, using your strengths, is that you can be strong, right? You can do it a lot easier than other people can. And it'll come easier to you than it will to other people. I have no idea what those are, but I know what. If we're going to reach the 500, if we're going to possibly do that, and I'm just throwing out a number, if we're going to grow, it's going to be because all of us are using our strengths to the glory of God. Yeah, you're going to have weaknesses, but you know what? I have weaknesses that other people are strong in. and they help me in those places. The same with you. And as we work together, we figure those things out. We learn and grow together. And we don't, the elders help with that. They help point us in the right direction. They might even sit down with us and say, what are you good at? What do you like? And trying to push us and get us all going in the same direction. But you could do it with or without that. They aid, but you're the one that has to decide, I'm going to get busy. I'm going to do this. We also need to have a long goal focus. Acts chapter 15, we have the great debate about circumcision in the church. And they came to the conclusion that they were not going to enforce circumcision because this is what the Holy Spirit told them because of the Scriptures. But there's a statement there in Acts chapter 15 that we should all be striving for. The secret to growth of the church in the first century was this. It says in verse 21, Moses has had throughout many generations those who preach him in every city, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath. That was what God did. He created all those synagogues so that people would be reading Moses. So when Paul came through, he could teach them about the Messiah that Moses was talking about. What if it's only 3 generations from now? What if it takes us 3 or 4 generations from now to reach 500 people in this community? It's a lot longer than 20 years. But would it be bad? Absolutely not. When we take the time to help people learn the Scriptures, the result will be we'll have baptisms, we'll have conversions. The Word of God will work if we put in the effort. We also need to be small effort focused. Just think about some things that you could be a part of. I'm going to go through this really quickly. Texting, I do this. I'm trying to develop that. I'm building community. This is something that you could do as well. We have local social media that we could do. You can make new friends, by the way. If you enjoy making friends, you go out and make friends. Then you're just having fun making friends, right? You also can have community groups. We have a lot of different community groups. We have Bible learning groups already. We have seminars that we have had in the past and we can have in the future. We're going to have support groups that could be coming up. I've actually had people asking us, hey, do y'all have any support groups for grief and different things like this? We have different community groups that we could be doing. Like I said, we could have homeschool classes. We could have ESL, Bible, English as a second language for Bible learning. We could have all kinds of things that we're involved in. I'm not saying we're going to do any of those things. But maybe you can. Maybe you have a talent and ability and say, I think I can do something. I can reach out in the community. I can make an impact, even if it's a small little thing like sending an email once a month. It's a start. And here's the thing. The only people who can limit our ability to get out and reach out into the community is us. That's the only limits we have. God certainly isn't limiting you. Our society around, as bad as it's getting, it's not limiting us. We can do whatever we want to religiously, for the most part. We're the ones who limit ourselves. Think about the other small things. New movers. We've had people visit because of those new movers programs. We've had visitors. We visit visitors. And if people come and they show interest here, we go to their house and we try to visit them. That's a great thing because what that does is it shows that we care about them and they're interested enough to at least stop by and take it takes a lot of courage to walk into a church building you've never seen before. And they come in and sit down and we talk to them and then they leave and we go and talk to them again. We have a lot of impact. We can have cottage meetings. We can hang materials on doors, which some of us are doing right now. We have potlucks. The potlucks it's okay if you invite friends to potluck. It's wonderful to go up to a friend and say, please come to us, come to worship with us Sunday because we're having potluck. Who doesn't love to eat, right? Why don't we invite people to that? Do we think it's closed off? Only Christians can come to the potluck? Absolutely not. We want, what would happen if we had 50 people from the community come to potluck because we all invited them? We'd run out of food, and what would we do? We'd go to the store and buy food and come back and fix it for them. It's not that big a deal. But we have these booths that we can meet each other. We have game nights. We have devotionals that we can be doing all over the place in people's houses and all kinds of things. We have emails that we can do. We have door knocking to invite people. We have good deeds that we can go around the community doing. We can have some enthusiasm about growth in the church. We can offer spiritual counseling. We can offer mentoring. We can offer discipling. We can offer all kinds of things. Why are we doing some of these. And we look around, and I've done this myself. I'll look around and go, I'll be honest, I haven't done this in a while. I look around and go, I don't have enough to do. I don't think I can do it. I don't have anything to do. How can you say we have nothing to do? I don't know what to do. Yeah, you do. If you want, I've got lists that in my house. I'll show you sometime if you want to see notebooks full of lists of things that we could be doing as Christians. Not y'all. Just ideas that we could have. We could do all kinds of things. We are limited by the principles of the gospel. And I can't imagine any of the things that I've already listed, not to mention the hundreds of things else that we could do, where God would say, no, you can't do those kinds of things. I don't want you reaching out into the community and helping people. I don't want you to show love to the people around you so that you can build relationships and bring them closer to God. I don't want any of those things. I'd rather you just sit and wonder what you could do next. We know that's not the truth. We can do so much. Why do we limit ourselves? We write ourselves off. Say, I can't. But it's God who works through us. So you can. We are the only limits that we have. But think about this last point. Why would anybody want to listen to us? When I teach at the School of Preaching, I'm teaching Homiletics 1, which is basically Preaching 101, teaching them how to do devotionals. And the first question I teach them to ask is, why would anybody want to listen to this? If you can't answer that, then don't do it. Why would anybody listen to us? You know, we have a lot to offer people. We have hope, we have joy, we have peace, we have reconciliation with God. There is so many blessings in being a Christian. Why would they want to listen? Here's some thoughts for you, though. They wouldn't want to listen unless you were non-judgmental. They're not going to want to listen unless you're available. They're not going to listen unless you're trustworthy and that you're near them. And think about that idea. I love this is a little thing that came up with near. Near is, first of all, natural and authentic. Just be yourself. If you're a Christian and you just go out and be yourself, if you're faithful to God, you just be yourself, you're going to make an impact on other people. You can't help it. But you got to be intentional about being out there, being near to people, being emotive. Another one, the idea of, being willing to be empathetic, to have some emotion, to be excited with them, to be sad with them, to weep when they weep, and to rejoice when they rejoice, to be those kinds of people who, when you're talking to people, you're happy for them if good things happen and sad for them if they don't. Actively listening to other people. It's a talent. It's a skill that needs to be developed. You listen by looking them in the eye and paying attention to what they're saying instead of waiting, trying to think of what you want to say next. We all get caught up doing that. But listen to them. They will tell you, if you have a long enough conversation with them and just let them talk, they will tell you everything you need to know as far as how to help them come to Jesus. They're going to give you all kinds of things that you can help them with. And when you find out, I've said this many times, when you find out somebody has a problem, that is gold. It's not because you're going to manipulate them. It's because now you have an opportunity to serve them. Now you have an opportunity to impact them, to say, what can I do to help you? And if you can think of a way to help them, don't ask them, would it be okay if you had some help? Tell them, I'm helping you. I'm going to do this. If they refuse, fine. But if you ask them, politeness says, no, if someone offers you something and ask if they can do something for you, a polite person will go, no, that's okay, I don't need it. You don't do that. You just tell them, I'm going to do this. If they don't want to do it, if they don't want you to do it, they'll tell you, but you may make an impact on them. And then the last one is to be responsive to them. So you act, they react, and then you act again. You're responsive to them. And Those are just simple ideas. I know that with God, we can do all kinds of things. He can work through our efforts. He can do amazing things through little bitty seeds that we plant. But keep doing it. Keep putting your effort in. Keep looking around and saying, I can do this. Here's an opportunity. Keep taking advantage of those opportunities, because it's only when we do those things consistently that we will make an impact. I'm so thrilled to see so many people active. And here's the thing about this. We don't come at it from one spot. We don't have one thing that we do that everyone does, and that's how we do our evangelism. That doesn't work very well. What we do is we have that one and that one and that one and that one. And you know what? There are people that I've met in the community here who have given me a list of ways that we've contacted them. They've seen us on the website. They saw us at the booth. They got an email from us. They got a visitor card. All kinds of ways. We're attacking from so many different fronts. And it's only a matter of time before we make so much of an impact that people are going to start responding. None of us can control the response. All we can do is to do what Jesus said: go out and make disciples. We go and teach. That's our job. And we teach in every conceivable way possible that we can do. And when you do that, you're going to make an impact. And it might be 30, 40 years from now where that impact actually pays off, and you may never know it. But I suspect in heaven, we might have some kind of way of knowing that. I would absolutely love for a lot of people to come to me on Judgment Day and say, I appreciate what you said to me. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you looked around and saw hundreds or thousands of people that were there because of your minor little bitty thing that you thought was so small that you did? You have no idea the impact that you'll have. But I know the impact that you won't have if you don't continue to do what God said. Hang in there. God can work through your efforts. So this evening, if you have any needs of the church, we're here for you. You know, I hope that this wasn't in any way feel browbeating or anything like that. I want to encourage, and I don't know if I'm good at it, but I do want you to recognize that you have a lot to offer. Stop selling yourself short and get involved, because God can work wonders through you, just like He can work through any of us. If there's any way we can help you, please, once you come as we stand and sing.